Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your patience while we had an overflow crowd here, so thank you for letting us get everyone seated. I'm Sandra Brooke. I'm the Avery Director of the library here at the Huntington, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this first event in the Huntington's new series, Why It Matters, and to tonight's program, a conversation between Dr. Karen Lawrence, President of the Huntington, and Dr. Carla Hayden, the Librarian of Congress. If you Google librarian stereotypes, you will find a dispiriting selection. Words like puritanical, introverted, timid, shushing, and bun-wearing. I can assure you that tonight's speaker is none of those things. In fact, if you do an internet search for Carla Hayden, the descriptor you will find time and again is rock star. Indeed, Dr. Hayden's appointment in 2016 as the 14th Librarian of Congress was greeted with huzzas, delight, and great pride by librarians and the communities she has served across America, and that enthusiasm has only grown in the years since. The Library of Congress is more than a great repository. It is a flagship, a critical pace setter, and a policy leader for libraries nationally and internationally. Dr. Hayden brought a powerful mix of knowledge, community insight, and frontline and executive experience to her position as LC's chief. A graduate of Roosevelt University with a PhD from the Library School of the University of Chicago, Dr. Hayden began her career as a children's librarian and young adult services coordinator at the Chicago Public Library. She went on to be library services coordinator for the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago and taught library and information science as an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Hayden returned to Chicago in 1991 as the Chicago Public Library's Deputy Commissioner and Chief Librarian, and she is especially renowned for her visionary leadership as CEO of the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, Maryland, where she was appointed in 1993. A past president of the American Library Association and Library Journal's Librarian of the Year, Dr. Hayden is the first woman and the first African American to serve as the Librarian of Congress. And she is also the first professional librarian in 60 years to hold that post. Dr. Karen Lawrence is the 9th president of the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens, having been appointed here in 2018 following a decade as president of Sarah Lawrence College, a highly regarded liberal arts college in Yonkers, New York. She led the School of Humanities at the University of California, Irvine as dean from 1998 until 2007. Dr. Lawrence has been president of the Society for the Study of Narrative Literature and the International James Joyce Foundation. And she currently serves on the board of the National Humanities Center in the Research Triangle, North Carolina. A respected scholar of English and Irish literature, Dr. Lawrence has written widely on 20th century literature, particularly the work of James Joyce, and on women and travel and experimental writing. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Karen Lawrence and Dr. Carla Hayden.
Well, it's a real thrill to welcome Carla Hayden to the Huntington. Can you all hear? Okay, that's my mic check. I'm a little nervous because I've never interviewed a rock star before.
Librarian and rock star, oxymoron.
But Sandy just explained it. So, as most of the people in the audience know, at the Huntington we're celebrating our 100th anniversary with a year-long series of events, lectures, performances, different kinds of events. And we began this particular series, Why It Matters, a new public series, to really focus on our three superb collections in the library, the art museum, and the botanical gardens. And particularly to focus on how they're relevant to the concerns that we have in society today. So in 1919, when Henry and Arabella had the vision to create a trust to share their collection and estate, they did it for the purposes of research, education, and the public good, the benefit of the public. And we've stayed true to that mission. I think they would be both very pleased and somewhat surprised to see the evolution of that mission over 100 years. I don't think Henry ever anticipated that 750,000 visitors from around the world would be visiting at the Huntington today. But why the humanities and arts matter, why the biodiversity in our botanical gardens matter to the planet and the people who live on it. These are things that we hope to take up in conversations in this ongoing series. But tonight it's library night. Tonight you're here, and we're so happy that you're inaugurating this series. Everyone also knows that Henry's passion was the library, and so tonight that's what we'll focus on. He said the library will tell the story, and so we're looking forward to focusing on that tonight with you. So I would like to begin by reading a letter, and something relevant in our collection in the library that has just come to us in the last couple of months.
I better put this down.
Yeah. And
This could be something.
This could be something, and I'll give you something, a copy of the letter. But let me tell you about it. It's a letter that came in the Shapiro collection of presidential papers, which is part of a new wonderful endowed center, the Shapiro Center for American History and Culture, that's going to be at the Huntington, which will build on our premier early American manuscripts and books. And I think the Shapiros are in the audience, Dennis and Susan, and we're really thrilled about this center. But what I'm going to read is very germane to tonight and a good way to start. It's a letter from Franklin Roosevelt to Archibald MacLeish, poet, playwright, and statesman. It was written in 1939, and it's about MacLeish's selection for the Librarian of Congress position. Wow. So, and here is the letter. I'd like to start with this, and I need my glasses. Dear Archie MacLeish, it is one of those curious facts that when I got your first letter, I took to my bed with a severe attack of indigestion. And that when your second letter came, I found myself able to rise and resume my normal life. You make me very happy, and the nomination will go to the Senate in a few days. I will take care of the matter of approval by the senators from your state.
Wow.
It's perfectly all right about your taking office after the summer is over. Say the end of September or the 1st of October. And I'm also very clear that you will be able to take time off for writing, especially if you like travel to distant parts where you could also improve your knowledge of ancient literature. For example, as Librarian of Congress, you should become thoroughly familiar with the inscriptions on the stone monuments of Easter Island, especially in their relationship to similar sign writing alleged to exist on ancient sheepskins in some of the remoter Lama series of Tibet. If you go on such a trip, this is Franklin Roosevelt, I want to remind you, I would like to go along as cabin boy and will guarantee that I will not interrupt the muse when she is flirting with you. As ever yours, Franklin Roosevelt.
Oh, and I can get a copy of that?
And here is your copy.
Thank you.
So I have a
wow.
question about this.
The White House, Washington, June the 6th, 1939.
And that's
Thank
for you, a copy of that. And my question is, did President Obama send you a similar letter? And did you extract concessions from him as well?
And I'm really loving the part about nomination will go to the Senate in a few days. I will take care of the matter of approval.
I thought that was good.
That sounds promising. What I was very fortunate to have an opportunity, and I call it the ultimate job interview, when you were in the Oval Office talking to the President of the United States. And what I was fortunate enough to have the experience to have the President of the United States say, I've seen the contents of Abraham Lincoln's pockets the night he was assassinated. I've seen Teddy Roosevelt's diary. And on February 14th, there's an X, and it says, the light has gone out of my life, because his mother and his wife died in the same house on the same day. And he went. And he listed a few other things that were treasures in the Library of Congress. And he said, what could you do as Librarian of Congress to let other people know? And he did say, I think it's because of who I am, too, that he's seen these things. What could you do to make sure that people could see these things and have access to the treasure that is the Library of Congress?
So that's what he
And
emphasized.
that's what he wanted.
Yeah. So at your inauguration, you quoted the 6th Librarian of Congress, Ainsworth Rand Spofford, who said that the library is, quote, the book palace, of the American people, in which you all have equal rights with me, and in which the works of all of you will be welcomed and forever preserved, kind of following in what you were just saying. So people might be confused about exactly what the Library of Congress is and whom it serves. It's the Library for Congress.
Yes.
And the Library for the people. So if you
And
could just
to give a little context
Yeah.
to that quote, Spofford had just been responsible for overseeing the first building, separate building for the Library of Congress, and it opened in 1897. The Library of Congress was started in 1800 with about 600 law books. And if you recall, the capital had just moved from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C., and this library, they said that there is no matter that a subject that a member of Congress should not have to refer. That was Thomas Jefferson, because there was a fire, and in 1814, Thomas Jefferson sold his collection to the government.
because it had
was
burned
the
down
largest,
in the Capitol building, right?
You'll appreciate this. I was shown during my confirmation process, you'd have a Senate, that's why I love that line. I'll take care of it. Senate confirmation process, you meet the senators, and I was shown the fireplace that the British had used to put some of those books and to start the fire in the Capitol. And was assured, don't you do that. That's Librarian of Congress. And then he sold, and it was 6,000 volumes, and it was a universal collection. It had the Koran, it had books in other languages, and that was the real start of the Library of Congress. And then over time, the library grew and grew, and Spofford was responsible for the construction of the Thomas Jefferson Building in Washington, D.C. That is the first federal building to have electricity. So if you visit, you'll see all these wonderful light fixtures with light bulbs, because they were so proud. But he called it the Book Palace to show it was all American labor, all craftsmanship, to show that in America, in this country, we build palaces to knowledge. It was built on Italian Renaissance.
That's lovely.
So the Librarian of Congress now has responsibility for administering this special library that serves the American people, but it has a worldwide collection. 470 languages are collecting, and over half of the collection is in languages other than English. 171 million items, 836 miles of shelving. Now, I should do the West Coast equivalent of that's from Washington, D.C. to Davenport, Iowa. So just flip it. And so, and 2 other buildings right there. So quite a bit. And so that's what the Librarian of Congress is responsible for.
So it's both the research library.
The research library, and we call it's a Congressional Research Service, because that's still the Library of Congress. So the Library of Congress is the nonpartisan, objective research arm for Congress. So whenever Congress is in session, there are about 400 people, different specialties, specialists in energy, any kind of policy area, and my favorite is embedded librarians in these policy groups, and they are there to give that information to Congress, special forces, and then there are the curators and librarians and specialists and other.
And they need it, right?
That's why it started.
Yeah.
The reference library for Congress.
So when you were named to the position, you had spent, as Sandy said, your career in the public library system. And I'm just wondering how people reacted, or what they thought about it, and what it signaled in terms of the mission of the Library of Congress. I mean, it was a signal in some ways.
In that lovely introduction, and I must say, when I heard it, I thought, boy, I wish my mom was here, because she loves to hear it listed, and she might have pointed out a couple of things you missed. You know. Some moms do.
There.
She's like, she didn't say that, you know. So that does happen. What was interesting, you noticed that it was the librarian at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And that was an opportunity to take a museum, special library that served curators and library and staff of a museum, and make a public library available as well. So that was a good experience. Right. And then teaching library service, different aspects of library service, and then spending time at especially the Enoch Pratt Free Library. That's the first public library system in the United States. And in fact, Mr. Andrew Carnegie came to Baltimore before he started his program of libraries, and in his Gospel of Wealth, he has a section on Enoch Pratt, and said that's the best example of philanthropy. Wow. And public partnerships, and it was a state library as well. So I'd had experience in different aspects. That's my mom. She's calling. Oh boy, you better answer that. Yeah. So.
And you were in.
And so I had this combination of, and then being active in the American Library Association with different types of libraries, and so I had a pretty broad experience, but spent quite a bit of time at the Enoch Pratt Free Library that had a special collections, the H.L. Mencken collection and Edgar Allan Poe, all these types of things. So it all came together. And so what the signal was, though, I think, if there was one, was that the Library of Congress was continuing to evolve, always collecting, always making sure that things were preserved, and that, but they were, it was also indication that we wanted to make sure that people knew about it, knew what we had, digitizing as many things as we could, and all of this that, hey, the Library of Congress. And so that's when I started tweeting.
Ah,
So
which
when
you've
I
done today from
done
here?
it already.
Okay.
So as a professional librarian, even though I knew about the Library of Congress, I had been involved with it in so many ways. And my predecessor, Dr. Billington, I knew him. So it was that I made the mistake initially of saying, oh, it has every book that's ever been published. Well, it doesn't.
No.
And I knew that if I didn't know as a lot of these things about the Library of Congress, and that you can get a reader's card at 16, most people don't know that, that the public, general public didn't know, and that all the things that are online. So when I stepped off the stage after being sworn in, I said, my first tweet was, I'm going on an adventure as a Librarian of Congress, and please join me. And so now every day or two or something, we put up things and say, look at this.
So that seems like a fulfillment of what Barack Obama
Yes, that was what
really
the president had
wanted.
asked,
Yeah.
open it up. This is the nation's library. And people need to know that it's theirs.
So, I mean, that's interesting also for the Huntington as a research library.
Yes.
And yet with a public mission that we are fulfilling, and finding different ways of doing it, whether you share resources online, which everyone is attempting to do so that that people can have access to what you have, but also that you are really open to the public. I mean, are there tensions at all between those two missions in the Library of Congress?
Not really, when you think about it. You're preserving it, you're collecting all these things for what?
Yeah.
It's just a mausoleum if no one uses it. And so you have to, there's a balance in terms of what you make available, what you do, but you want people to use it. You want to have scholarship continue. You want to grow scholars. So that's the balance that you have to have.
Yeah, and consistent with each other.
I'm going to put this down. I keep looking at that line. I better, it's very distracting.
But it's for you, so you get to take
distracting.
it, you get to take it with you. I heard you give a speech last year, and a couple of other people we talked to heard you give the speech at the Lincoln Club, which, for people who don't know, is a nonpartisan club that celebrates the legacy of Abraham Lincoln and meets once a year, which is a good kind of club to celebrate the legacy. And you told the story of visiting your grandparents in the summers regularly, and they lived in Springfield, Illinois, the birthplace and the home of the Lincoln Museum.
Well, the home of...
The home, not, okay, the home. And of the Presidential Library and Museum,
Yes, that's
right?
the birth.
That's right, okay. And I just thought, I was so moved by that, and it just seems so meaningful.
Well,
I'd love to have you say
my
something.
family's from basically Illinois, my mom's family, and I have some cousins that I haven't seen in 50 years that came. My mom called them. They called them. So they're here. I haven't seen them since high school, so they're here.
And I thought it was the
family.
publication of the Huntington.
It was, but that started a whole chain of events. Middle Illinois, Springfield, Illinois, and parts south, and then Champaign, Urbana. Oh, okay. A few people, Champaign, Urbana. We were townies in Champaign. But every summer and all holidays, I spent with my grandparents in Springfield, Illinois. And so my earliest memories were about Abraham Lincoln. We'd go to New Salem, which is where it's a village not far, and most of my relatives on that side are buried in Oak Ridge Cemetery, and you pass Abe, played with Lincoln logs. We know the whole story, and Rutledge, we Lincoln.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. And so visiting his home, and everything. It just was such a part of it. And so to be asked to talk about Lincoln's legacy at the Lincoln Club, and let's just say it's a very distinguished club, and it's that, and I think they were a little surprised that this brown person would talk about Lincoln and have that kind of connection in such a way that what it symbolized as a brown person and Lincoln, and having that familiarity was something. So to be asked to talk about it was
it was a
something.
great talk, and maybe not one that people had heard there, but it was,
No.
it was really.
No, I can vouch for that.
But it was a wonderful.
It was
talk.
because you don't realize, and so this Lincoln symbolism that when I was sworn in, the Library of Congress has, and you know this feeling being at the Huntington, where you can talk about superlatives about your collections. The largest collection of religious texts and Bibles. And so the tradition was that you get to be sworn in on one of the significant Bibles. And of course, they said, how about the Lincoln Bible? And it had only been used 2 other times. Lincoln and President Obama, when he was sworn in Springfield. And so that was so significant for me.
And I think maybe a slight digression, but you got to see some of the Lincoln papers spent the day today.
So somehow you all found out about the Lincoln connection. And also my love and appreciation for the writer Octavia Butler and your archives here. And so that just was something. I have been to the shop, I did buy the book.
She found our store, which is not surprising.
I passed that and said, we have to stop by the store. But what was so wonderful was on the same table, and this is what illustrates the breadth and depth of special collections and research libraries like the Huntington, and what you can do, that on one table, one long table, your librarians and curators were able to bring out in Lincoln's hand notes, the pass that he gave to a man who was like a bodyguard or something, that was on April 11th, saying he has permission to take a trip. And that man, if he had been there on the 14th, things might have been, and he regretted that the rest of his life and all of that. And also 1850, you get your decades mixed up in centuries with these institutions. The 1850 large photograph in Lincoln's home. And there were African Americans in front, and there was a parade. It was Lincoln's home, and you could see Lincoln on the doorstep. And I was able to say, oh, that's Lincoln's home, 8th and Jackson. And the lady said, it is 8th and Jackson. I said, yeah, it's 8th and Jackson, I know that. And then you're seeing all this stuff, and then they showed the Octavia Butler collection.
On the same table.
On the same table. So you go from Abraham Lincoln, Springfield, and then Octavia Butler, and then my best. Now this is, you said I could show this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I met with the librarians here, and that was just, librarians, you may know, we have a close kinship.
Your peeps.
Peeps, I call them. And so whenever I get to, so we had our moments, and we had a good thing. And they presented me with a copy of one of Octavia Butler's things. And it's the one that says libraries and literacy and writing and read and kindred and all of these things. And it was just, so this will go in my office right away. Right away. But that you could have that range all on one table.
Yeah. So we can use superlatives.
You can use superlatives.
I think that's true.
But that's what these special libraries, that's when you think about why it matters, that it does matter, that you have these materials, that you collect them, and that you exhibit them. Your treasures gallery was wonderful.
Remarkable works and beautiful science. We have,
Gutenberg, you have this,
yeah.
Chaucer, you have all of these
yeah.
things. It's just
And for
lovely.
scholars coming to work.
But
And-
there was just regular
Yeah,
people.
no, absolutely,
Yeah.
in our exhibition hall.
Oh, sure.
But also the kind of work that can be done by
the
scholars is.
original scholarship. But that's what I mentioned about growing scholars. When I say regular people, people who were visiting the gardens or they're doing stuff and they go in and they see the exhibit, and you don't, what imagination is sparked by seeing manuscripts or seeing these wonderful things? You never know what's being sparked.
We have school programs, and a number of LAUSD classes come and look at beautiful science and how scientific ideas changed, or Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and write horror, some kind of manuscript. So, I mean, that is really the inspirational part.
And they can see themselves at times, too. I went in the shop, Mary Ball, a scientist, and you see different things as well in the exhibits, and then you can read more about it. So it's...
Going back to the public, on the theme of the public, in January, a Gallup poll concluded that visiting the library remains the most common cultural activity Americans engage in by far. In fact, last year, Americans visited the library at least twice as often as they went to the movies, live sporting events, museums, concerts, amusement parks, and casinos.
Together.
Among other activities. And I think, it sounds like that's kind of surprising. It was surprising to me. And what do you think the significance of libraries are in people's lives? Why would that be so compelling?
And especially public libraries, and they're in almost every community. I mentioned Andrew Carnegie, and the spread of public libraries as opportunity centers, places that you could go and have a world. I had a luncheon with a lady quite well-to-do yesterday, and she talked about what the public library offered to her. She could see other worlds. She could imagine being something else. And there are now libraries that are offering, and one I was in Ohio, Beyond Books. You could check out a sewing machine, you can check out musical instruments, you can check out tools and all of this. And the one that really stumped me, because I thought they were having construction, traffic cones. So I just thought and I said, excuse me, but traffic cones? And they said, yes, because people, you think about it, you're teaching a young person to drive, or you're having construction done. So yes, in our community, being able to check out that. So they are where people get information, apply for jobs, there are all types of community services, and all of these different things are happening in public libraries.
And Library of Congress has outreach kinds of things.
And one of the most significant aspects of reaching out to public libraries is our library services to the blind and print disabled. The talking books and the Braille, and that service is in public libraries and administered by public libraries as well.
I saw a talk that you did with David Ferriero.
National Archives.
The National Archives. And I'm not sure if everyone knows exactly what the precincts are or the territories of the National Archives versus the Library of Congress. In fact, you had a kind of friendly rivalry.
Yes.
Talking about the time when the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution was supposed to be transferred from the Library of Congress to the National Archives, because the National Archives had been created, in 34 or something.
34, and then World War II. And the Library of Congress has the papers of 23 presidents from George Washington to Coolidge, and then FDR started the presidential library system, and 36 Supreme Court justices, so there was the that, so it was the library record. And then when the archives became established again after World War II, there was, well, tanks rolled up the steps to retrieve the Declaration and all those things and take them over there. But what we found, a letter similar to that, there's correspondence that we've discovered between the archivists of the United States and the Librarian of Congress saying, this is going to be good.
So it was staged.
Almost like, what time do you know, are they coming? Because this, yeah, it was kind of, and it was friendly, and it was like, yes, let's make this into something, because the archives were just getting established, and this was a great way to show that these wonderful documents were going there and establish the archives, because the Library of Congress had already been recognized.
So it wasn't a real
but the
military.
photos are great.
Yeah.
Because you see the tanks and everything.
You can
right
go
up the
online
steps.
and
You go
see
online.
this.
It's one of our best.
Conversation.
1952. It was great.
Yeah. In the current issue of the Los Angeles Review of Books, Jeremy Braddock, who's an associate professor of English at Cornell, says that recent events have underscored that the essential function of the library and of librarians is as active and not passive agents. In other words, the library is not neutral ground. You mentioned the need to give objective information, but two examples. In January 2017, the Data Refuge Initiative was undertaken at Penn to download and preserve climate change data housed in the Internet Archive. And I know another example is in 2005, the use of the American Library Association's privacy policy, instituted in '39 to challenge the Patriot Act. And I think, I guess my question is, do you see yourself as an activist? And have there been times when you felt that I don't know what, that call to take us?
It's interesting because there have been times that librarians have been called, talk about an oxymoron, feisty fighters for freedom. Oh, we had T-shirts made. Loved it. Librarians have always, in many ways, for quite a bit, I think they are neutral in that they've always, there was a saying in the pre-internet days, let the books battle it out on the shelf. That you give different views. So you might have a pro and a con book, and you make sure that it's balanced. Yeah. So people might interpret that as something, but what it is making sure that you present and give people the option to read what they want, to make their own decisions by presenting the materials. And that's where librarians have been, I think, active in making sure that that basic principle is maintained as much as possible. And that's where you have people who don't want you to have that book on the shelf.
Right.
Or they don't think that that author is someone that should be listened to. Difficult history, all these types of issues come up. And so what librarians are committed to is giving books a fair chance.
But also you kept the Enoch Pratt Library open during the protests of Freddie Gray. I mean, that was really important to keep
right,
the
to
library.
that community, because in that community, and during that time in the city of Baltimore, you probably saw things on the national news, the burning car, all of these things. Well, the library, the branch library, the Pennsylvania Avenue Library, was at the corner, right there across from that car that you saw, or all of the unrest. And it's the opportunity center for that neighborhood. Yeah. And it has 2 stories of glass. It's a beautiful facility right on that corner. And in fact, before things were heating up in the neighborhood, before the real and rest. And we were kind of advised, maybe you should board up that glass. What would happen? And we thought, no, what signal would that send to the community? And lo and behold, young men from the neighborhood stood in front of that library. And nothing happened, no graffiti, nothing happened to that library. And we did decide to open because we knew in that community, people needed that public library to get online, to get their job applications in, that real life issues were happening that they needed to attend to. And so we were the only facility open for the media, for that, and then people started bringing in food and diapers and things because there were no services.
That's
and my mom is a former, and the only trepidation I had when I talked about this was you can't have staff members doing something that you wouldn't do. So, okay, yeah, open. No, I'll be there. The only hesitation I had was when to tell my mom. So she went into social work and stuff and did that. So I waited and you know how this is. You wait till 5 minutes before you're going to do something. And I called and I said, well, I'm going down, going to be there. There are a lot of volunteers coming. We're going to open it. And she paused, and all she said was, take some water and some paper towels. And then 2 days later, she was sitting at the information desk dispensing fruit, because she got some fruit and all of this. So, but that being there for the community when you're needed is important.
Yeah, well, that was great.
Yeah.
Let me shift gears quickly,
Sure.
and then we'll open it up for questions.
Great.
I watched on I think it was on PBS when you when the Gershwin Prize, which is given by the Library of Congress, was given to Smokey Robinson, one of my favorites. And there are so many things going on now. The National Book Festival, National Jukebox, Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction. So, and every time I've seen you at anything like that, you look like you're having a blast.
Well, Smokey Robinson.
Yeah, I know. That's what I think.
And now the Gershwin Prize winner this year is Garth Brooks. And his wife is going to be there, Miss Sherwood, and last year was Gloria and Emilio.
Yeah, this was
Estefan.
2017.
Yeah, that was my first year. I said,
Yeah.
boy, this is such a hard job. Jeez.
So
Be
my-
with Smokey and but that's it. It emphasizes the popular culture aspect and popular song. Tony Bennett was awarded the Gershwin Prize because the Library of Congress has the archives of George and Ira Gershwin.
Yeah.
And so you see Porgy and Bess, and you see when he inverted Mammy and Pappy in Summertime, and we have all of that, plus Rodgers and Hammerstein, Leonard Bernstein, Scott Joplin, all of these things. So that award, and the Poet Laureate.
Yeah.
Robert Frost was one of the first Poet Laureates, and so Joy Harjo now, the first Native American to be a Poet Laureate.
So my last question about the Gershwin Festival is, do you ever have extra tickets?
Yes. And it's a wonderful, wonderful occasion, as you see.
I'd love to open things up for questions, and if you have them, and I'll repeat them because we don't have mics out. Wow, it's great.
So just shout it
Rothenberg is
out.
totally full. I love it.
Oh, and thank you so
Yeah.
much. But thank you to the Huntington. Thank you. This is a wonderful place. Wonderful place.
Yes, right in the front.
What made you decide to go into library science?
Uh-oh. Well, I've said this publicly. I'm an accidental librarian. So, graduated political science, history. Thinking about my next steps. Was I going to go to law school? Was I going to do this? And while I was doing all that thinking, my mom said, you know, you could seek employment. as you think. And so I started going on job interviews, and that's why I encourage young people to do internships, do whatever you can to have jobs, because when you go out and you have no experience, they tell you, nice grades, you're nice young lady, but no. And so between these very nice little interviews and rejections, I would go to my favorite place, the Central Library of Chicago. And because that's where I would hang out, and I love libraries, and I love reading. And so I'm sitting there, and one of the people who graduated with me came in and said, hey, Carla, are you here for the library jobs? They're hiring anybody. And so what he meant was, and libraries still do this, it's called library associate. They hire people with bachelor's degrees in different areas, and then you find out about the profession. And so I went upstairs, filled it out. I love books and reading, everything. I got the job. He didn't, but he's doing fine. He did business and all that. And then they put me on the south side of Chicago in a storefront with a young lady who was going to graduate library school. And I found out about the profession, and that was it. That was it.
Right back there.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the Library of Congress's initiatives in cataloging. I'm a cataloger, and I've been really interested to see particularly the work on changing subject headings.
And librarians and
Can everybody hear? I was supposed to repeat
about the
that.
Library of
No.
Congress's work with cataloging, because, you know, there's the Dewey system. We won't talk about Mr. Dewey. That's an entire another program. Melville. And then the Library of Congress classification system, and that is the system used by most research libraries, larger libraries than that. And the issue of subject headings is something that's perennial, or whatever. With that, I was part of the group in the 70s about, you know, do you have black, African American, Negro, all of that. And so that's something that's always coming up with subject headings and catalogers. And also, this young lady is very powerful. Catalogers. In library school, when you start, I still say it, it divides. The catalogers are the brainiacs. They're going to decide and make the decisions, and they used to be really powerful because they could put a number on a book and you never find it. So they think about those numbers. But that whole idea of how, and now we have t-shirts that say librarians, the original search engines.
Oh.
And we do that because that was our whole thing. How do you classify? Think about search engines. How do you search terms? And cataloging and identifying things is something that the Library of Congress is still, I think, at the forefront, and working on the web environment and different things. And so there's a project called BibFrame that they're working on, so to move to the next level.
But because it's the Research Library of Congress, I think Sandy was telling me, Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the early letters of the alphabet are more in history, political science, the kinds of things you might think Congress would, and literature's at P.
Library science is Z. So, you know, I mean,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying. It's how you do this classification. Because remember, this is pre-internet. This is that. And think about library, and think about the card catalog. My first job, one of my first jobs was filing card catalog cards, and I'm a bad speller. And I think about that. I said, it was never pure. And people used to rip the cards out and take them to the shelves.
A shock of recognition.
Yeah. So it was never the perfect instrument.
Other questions? Yes, right back there.
First of all, Dr. Hayden, I am a librarian and an archivist, and you are one of my heroes, so thank you for speaking
Oh,
with
thank
us.
you.
I have a question about the integrity of librarians and archivists when it comes to sharing their materials and the balance between constructing a narrative and maintaining the integrity of those materials. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Can you give us some guidelines on thinking how we attain that proper balance?
What is, and this has come up recently, and people might have read some things about when you alter things or when you don't and how you do it. One of the things you do is what you do in any editing process before things are displayed. What do you display? You have to look at your audience in terms of public display. And for instance, with the Library of Congress, we had a photo that had a curse word. And it wasn't discovered until it was blown up during installation. And it was the F word. Now, I started as a children's librarian. It was an exhibit. When you have a lot of young people coming in, you don't want the only thing they remember was, oh, look, there's the F word. And that's all they're going to remember about that exhibit. So we said, you know what, this is about this, not that. And you have review processes before you open something, and that's what our policy is, and that you look and you make those decisions because you have to balance. We've been doing user studies, and 20% of the people who visit the Library of Congress are under the age of 18. And we knew that, and we wanted to encourage them to come in. So we didn't think that word, and it wouldn't have mattered who it was referring to with the F word. We didn't want the F word.
Right. But you didn't alter.
No, it wasn't an exhibit.
Right.
That's easy. You know?
Yes, right here.
I want to thank you, Mrs. Lawrence, for putting on this Why It Matters. Thank Mrs. Hayden for coming out to Los Angeles. A couple of questions. One, I wanted to know about the Library of Congress' most important contributions to civil rights, what type of pieces you have in that department. And I was also curious about your relationship with Barack Obama. I did some research. It looks like he left Harvard around '93 and went back to Chicago. At the same time, you were working at the Chicago Public Libraries. I could be making, connecting the wrong dots, but I was curious if you knew him back then and how that relationship.
You connected the dot.
Let me repeat that, though. The Library of Congress and
Civil
significant
rights.
work in civil rights and connecting the dots. And did you know Barack Obama crossed paths in Chicago?
Right, we'll get back to that one, but we'll start with civil rights. Right now, the Library of Congress has an exhibit, Rosa Parks in her own words. And in fact, her birthday was a couple of days ago, and we put up, digitized some of the things, and they're online now, loc.gov. It's the Howard Buffett Jr. purchased the collection and made a gift to the Library of Congress. And so for the first time, you will see her family Bible, all of the things she went to. And it's a wonderful exhibit. It'll be up until August, but everything. The Library of Congress also has the papers, and the most used collection is the NAACP collection. It's an ongoing archive. There's constantly, it's putting materials there. Student Nonviolent Unit, and also Thurgood Marshall's papers. And the author, Scott Berg, is working on a book on Thurgood Marshall now. And we have Mary Church Terrell, and we have some other notables. Frederick Douglass. If you think about civil rights and rights, the Frederick Douglass papers are something. So we have quite a bit. And so those dots that you connected. Think of the irony of being at that deputy, that's a very Chicago title. First Deputy Commissioner / Chief Librarian. and you are working with the mayor's office, and working in that office is a person who is engaged to someone with that name. And years later, you've been recommended through your career as a librarian, and you're sitting across from this person who's now the president, and you're thinking, whoa. So when my grandmother said, she lived to be 95, and she saw some of these things unfold, she said, I never thought being a librarian was going to lead to this. You know, so the irony that years later you would be the nominee, and that was really something.
One more question, and then more. George?
Do you have staff who actively are out pursuing collections? You talked
Yes.
about gifts.
Yes.
And I was wondering how far afield are they ranging, and how many are they?
Oh,
And
there are
that whole
6.
process.
Did everyone hear
Oh,
that? I
I'm
want
sorry.
you to hear the question
Because
about
I got
gifts.
excited when he asked.
I want everyone in the audience to hear that collections are built from donations. And
From
we have,
donations, and
right.
you have some of
Right.
your generous donors.
We do, and a number are in the audience.
So there's that, but also the librarians, there's an entire unit, collection development, and they are actively looking at what can be purchased. In fact, we went together with the new museum, Smithsonian's Museum of African American History and Culture, to go together to bid on the first known photograph of Harriet Tubman, and kept it in that. So if you've seen the movie, and at the end when she's
haven't seen
being
it.
that, you have to see that. This is the last thing, and she's posing for that photograph, and then they show the photograph. That was the one we went together. So it's a combination of having appropriations from Congress to purchase and get materials, gifts of collections, or funds for collections, and then also just keeping your eye out and saying, this would be wonderful.
Dr. Carla Hayden, thank you
Oh, well,
so
thank
much.
you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let me just, this was a great inauguration of Why It Matters.
It
We can
matters.
see why it all matters. And I'd like to invite those of you in the audience to our next conversation. I'll be talking with Drew Faust, Civil War historian and former president of Harvard, on February 27th, I think. So thank you all for coming. There's coffee outside and cookies, and it's been a pleasure, and thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Drew will be great.